Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you guys about really just how surreal this world is as time goes by. And time has been traveling very, very fast. January of 2024 seemed like it was last week. Pretty soon it's going to be August. Then September. That'll be my birthday. And I'm going to be 34 years old. Then it's going to be October. December. And before you know it, we're going to be in 2025. I was thinking about this yesterday. I was thinking about this last night, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. ISIS doing its horrific reign of terror? That was 10 years ago. It seemed like it was just a few years ago that ISIS was doing all of its murderous, evil actions, and no, that was a decade ago. That was 10 years ago. And then I thought about it more. I thought more about this existential topic. Brexit was in 2016. Pretty soon, it's going to be 2026. Pretty soon it's going to be 2025. And that's going to go by real quick. And then it's going to be 2026. And at that point, Brexit will be 10 years old. But it seems like it was just a few years ago that Brexit happened. So then I think to myself, oh my goodness. The world is changing at a very, very turbulent rate. It's going by real fast. It's surreal. It's absolutely surreal. So then I think about this deeper. I think about this at a deeper level. What happens when 10 years go by? The world changes. What happens when 15 years go by? The world changes even more. So 4 or 5 years from now, there's going to be a major shift, more than likely. There's going to be a major shift. If not 5 years from now, then maybe 4.5 years from now, or maybe 6 years from now, there's going to be a major shift. The world is dramatically shifting from where it used to be. So, for example, and I've talked about this many a time, but I'm going to keep talking about this because it is a very, very relevant topic. The topic of Israel.
I'll ask in English. Do you believe that the Gentiles, the Goyim, will one day become the slaves of the Jews?
So I believe it's part of the Torah.
Okay.
Not a slave like a slave today. We're gonna beat them and then they become a slave. They're gonna see how much the Torah is meaningful. And they don't want the Jewish person to work. So they say, we help you in everything and you learn Torah. So
where in the Torah does it say this, by the way?
In the Zohar.
The Zohar is not the Torah, the Talmud.
Oh yes, we're gonna go there. We are going to go into the topic of Israel. The topic of Israel, everyone. I remember the days when we used to go to church and they had a Pray for Israel session. Oh yes. This was a big thing back in the day. Pray for Israel, and the pastor would come and pray for Israel. And you would have the American flag, but you would also have the Israeli flag in the church.
We are speaking out in the defense of Israel and the Jewish people. Israel is not a political issue. Israel is a Bible issue. King David commanded all believers everywhere for all time, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper that love you. David writes, my help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Listen, behold, he that keepeth Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. That word keepeth is a military term, meaning to defend. He who defends Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. There's an all-seeing eye constantly watching Israel, and it's God Almighty.
Oh my gosh, guys. It's almost as if Israel has been the 51st state of America. You know, they always say there's 50 states in the United States. No, there's 51 states. Guess which one is the 51st state? I'll give you guys a hint. It's not in North America. Oh, no, no, no. It's in the Middle East. It's amazing. So Israel has been extremely dependent on America. Even when Iran attacked Israel. Remember that? Remember Israel got attacked by Iran recently? Iran tried to hit Israel with 300 drones and missiles. They keep saying that Israel intercepted the missiles and blah, blah, blah. And yes, Israel did intercept the missiles, but not all of them. Israel intercepted some of the missiles. The United States intercepted more missiles and drones than Israel did. Which means that Israel is dependent on the United States. Now imagine, everyone, imagine. Iran hit Israel with a barrage of missiles. And Israel has its Iron Dome. They keep talking about this Iron Dome. They've been talking about this Iron Dome for years. Years, right? Israel's got an Iron Dome, man. They can just intercept all these missiles and blah, blah, blah. Okay. But what happens when Iran sends a barrage of missiles, a whole wave, a whole storm of missiles at Israel? And the missiles are coming, and Israel's trying to intercept them. Israel can't intercept all of them. Israel cannot intercept all of them. And even with the help of the United States, the British, the French, and the Arabs, Israel's Arab allies, the Saudis, Israel still was not able to intercept every single missile. So think about it. Think about this. What would happen if Iran hit Israel with thousands of missiles and just a few of them were armed with nuclear weapons? Israel can't intercept every single missile. And all it would take is just for one nuclear bomb to hit Israel to devastate the country. And when Iran attacked Israel with that barrage, with that storm of missiles and drones, Israel still needed the help of the United States and other countries. So what would happen if the United States just decided to wash its hands of Israel, wash its hands from this pro-Israel culture? And it is a part of American culture to be pro-Israel. It has been a big part. I'll just put it that way. It has been a big part of American culture to support Israel. But that's declining. Support for Israel in the United States is declining. And that goes back to the dramatic shift that we are experiencing as time goes by. Because as the years go by, and as we go through a decade of our lives, society alters. So 15 years passes by, society alters even more. Society changes even more. Societies cannot remain static. Societies cannot remain the same. They change. They dramatically shift. They go through various stages. They go through various stages of metamorphosis. They change. So the whole thing with America being this pro-Israel country, is this really going to last forever? Is this just going to be the same thing? It's going to be the same thing forever? I was reading this book today. Yep. Gaza, An Inquest into Its Martyrdom by Norman Finkelstein. Guys, I have never in my life picked up a book by Norman Finkelstein.
The original question put was whether Israel's held to a double standard. The response by your other guest was that, of course, it's obvious they're held to a double standard because look at all the resolutions condemning them. I then responded that the reason there are so many resolutions condemning them is because Israel simply ignores the resolutions. Now, Ken proceeds to give some Israeli propaganda points, which unfortunately have nothing to do with reality. One of the problems with debates like this is people have no knowledge of the facts. They go to an Israeli propaganda sheet and they simply read off of this propaganda sheet the nonsense of the Israeli government. So let's go through the stuff that Ken said, because I believe in facts. Number one, Ken said the people who condemn the settlements are partisan. They're prejudiced. They're anti-Israel, maybe anti-Semitic. Who was the first one to condemn the settlements as illegal? The very first person. The very first person was the legal advisor to the Israeli government, Theodore Meron, M-E-R-O-N. Meron went on to become a respected international jurist. At the time, in 1967, he lived in Israel, and he was the legal advisor to the Israeli government. They put to him the question, are the settlements legal? He said, no, they're not legal. The Israeli government acknowledged they weren't legal, privately. Meron was then asked a couple of years ago, do you still stand by the statement you made in 1967? He said, yes, it's true. The settlements are illegal. Allow me to finish.
I will, but just remember, it's a TV show, not a lecture. That's all I'm saying. Very important you put the facts across, but do try and put them across in a pithy manner.
If you want to just chat, then you should cut me off. I'm interested in facts. I'm not interested in chatting, and I'm not interested in propaganda. In 2006, the International Court of Justice ruled on the legality of the wall Israel is building the West Bank. All 15 judges, not one, not two, not three, not a plurality, not a majority, all 15 judges said the wall was illegal. Those 15 judges included the British judge, Rosalind Higgins, who is Jewish. It included Thomas Bergenthal, the American judge, who is a Holocaust survivor. He said the settlements are illegal. Now, is Ken trying to tell me and tell your audience with his stupid Israeli propaganda that all 15 judges in the International Court of Justice, all 15 are anti-Semitic, anti-Israel? Is that the argument he wants to make? That's nonsense. That's not believable. That's not plausible. That's the flat Earth society.
Well, let's Ken.
During Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9, Israel killed 1,400 Palestinians, destroyed 6,300 homes, killed 350 Palestinian children. What happened as a result of that? Israel prosecuted one soldier. One soldier got 7.5 months in jail for stealing a credit card. Stealing a credit card. That was the result of killing 1,400 Palestinians, 1,200 of whom were civilians, 350 of whom were children, 6,300.
I'm sorry. This is this is a classic example of.
Well, can I just interject on this point?
It's not the topic. We're not debating it. The professor is saying everything totally out of context. He's ignoring Hezbollah's terrorist tunnels. He's ignoring the thousands of missiles targeting Israeli civilians. He's just sorry.
Okay, guys, you need to one at a time. Look, let me just interject here for a second. Now, Norman, you're raising points. You raised, for example, Operation Cast Lead. Now, it should be obvious to anyone that the methods the Israeli army employed in that conflict, which have been spoken about numerous times by officers from other armies, exceeds that of any other Western country in terms of how they tackle things.
You're just speaking the biggest nonsense on God's earth.
Well,
you haven't
I don't think so.
You're talking about. You're talking about Kemp, Ron Kemp. You quote one person. Have you read the human rights report?
No. It's not just Richard Kemp.
Excuse me, sir, but I take deep offense at what you're saying because people are dead. Children are dead, and you're just speaking nonsense. There were 3
Israeli children are dead. Thousands of missiles were shot indiscriminately into civilian populations. No country in the world would tolerate such behavior. I'm sorry, Professor is just focusing exclusively on one side of the story.
Okay, let's.
Excuse Excuse me, sir. There were 300 human rights reports written on Operation Cast Lead. How many have you read? I read 300 of them. How many have you read? You just speak because Ron Kemp, that imbecile, that hate for Israel.
Okay, I think we need to. Let's.
No, it's
Okay.
despicable.
We
It's despicable how you carry on with your red tie and your crossed legs when people are being killed. And
Where's-
you cite the most ridiculous...
Norman Finkelstein,
Israeli-
where's your concern for the people of
Yeah,
Syria?
you're a
The
disgrace.
250,000 dead in Syria. How many reports in Syria have you read? How many? How many condemnations of the United Nations have you read
I
there?
don't stop hearing about Syria every day.
And where's your
Every day
condemnations of the United
about
Nations?
Syria. And
Where
I
are
don't hear
they?
apologists
Where are
like
they?
you. I don't hear apologists like you. I hear every
Where
day
are
about
they,
the
Norman
things going
Finkelstein?
on in Syria.
Where are they? Where are the
Every
condemnations
day,
internationally?
You're supposed to be a certifiable moron if you haven't heard condemnation of Syria.
I haven't at the United Nations. I haven't seen I haven't seen one resolution passed.
Brain dead if you haven't heard condemnation.
Not one resolution passed.
That's it. Conversation. You're brain dead. I'm not having a conversation with somebody who's brain dead. If you haven't heard every day, non-stop.
Well, you're not really having a conversation, are you? It's a diatribe.
Bashar Assad's assaults on civilians in Syria, then you're brain dead.
Okay, I think we need to dial it down just a little bit. Let's not get overexcited.
I don't want to go on because you don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen such stupidity being...
Well, I'm sorry to say that it looks like challenging Norman Finkelstein has led to him leaving.
I bought this book at Barnes & Noble in 2018. I bought the book because something happened in 2018. There was a shift that happened in my mind where I just decided I'm going to look at the other side of the argument when it comes to Israel. I'm not just going to listen to the typical narrative that I've been hearing since the 90s. I want to look at the other side of this conflict. So in 2018, this book came out. And I think this was the last serious book that Finkelstein wrote on the topic of Israel. Well, this book came out in 2018, the very year that I decided that I was going to look at the other side of it, at the other side of the whole Israel-Palestine controversy. And so I bought this book. But I put it in my bookshelf, and it just collected dust for years. And yesterday I decided that I was going to read it, and I started to read it. If you were to tell me 10 years ago, Theodore, this is what I mean by how things just shift as time goes on, and when a decade transpires, there's all these changes that happen, not just in society, but it happens in individuals. And really, when you have a change in society, of course, society is made up of individuals. So those individuals are going to go through changes. And changes in individuals leads to changes in society. So I thought I would just have to explain that. But if you were to tell me 10 years ago, in 2014, or even before that, in 2013, 2012, 2011, 2010, that, Ted, you are going to read Norman Finkelstein, I would not have believed you. Because at that time, over 10 years ago, I thought, Norman Finkelstein, that guy, he's just a self-hating Jew. He's very biased against Israel. He's pro-terrorist. Why in the hell would I ever read Norman Finkelstein? But here I am reading Norman Finkelstein. Why? Why am I reading Norman Finkelstein? What shift has happened? What's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. When the war first broke out in October, I thought, okay, there was a massacre. A lot of people were killed in Israel. Israel absolutely has the right to go to war, and it most definitely does have the right to go to war to defeat Hamas. But then I see stories of indiscriminate targeting of civilian areas, civilian infrastructure. I see a story of Israel killing aid workers. I see stories of Jewish extremists blocking trucks from delivering aid into Gaza. I see stories of extremists in Israel attacking Christians, attacking Armenian Christians, spitting on Christians.
We are a little community here. We get spit on every day. Wearing a cross, you will get spit on in this neighborhood. You will get into fist fights. And
who's spitting on you?
the Jews, of course, the Orthodox Jews. They are raised in their schools how to hate the Christians.
Blaspheming Christ. I see stories of Jews, extremist Jewish people, trying to push for laws to put limits on the teaching of Christianity, trying to put Christians in prison for simply preaching Christ in Israel. I see stories of Israeli soldiers killing civilians, murdering a man who was a Jew, who was an Arab, who had converted to Judaism, and how he had his hands up, and he wasn't a threat to anyone, and how the Israeli soldiers shot him in an execution at a bus stop.
אתה יהודי? בטח. איך קוראים לך יהודי? מטומטם. איך קוראים לך? דוד. דוד? בן אברהם מטומטם. בן אברהם, יופי. בבקשה. תיגע בזה, אני ארוג אותך, אתה מבין אותי? הרוג אותי. מי אתה? ידיים למעלה עכשיו. הנה, ידיים למעלה. בדיוק. מה אתה רוצה? אני רוצה שאתה תסתום את הפה ולא לזוז. סתמתי פה, בסדר. הנה, בבקשה, וחזרתי אחורה. יהודי.
I saw all these stories, and it's not as if this just began after October of 2023 when the war broke out. No. This thought process has been going on for years. Like I said, back in 2018, I thought to myself, what's the term? A seed was sowed. A seed was sowed in my soul. And that seed continued to germinate. A seed was sowed into my soul in 2018, and maybe even before that. And in 2021, I read a book. It was called "Pity the Nation." It was a great book on the Lebanese Civil War, and I read that book back in 2021. It was a very, very long, voluminous book. I mean, it's a long read, hundreds and hundreds of pages long. And Robert Fisk was a journalist who went to Lebanon in the 1980s, and even before that, he went to Lebanon to document the Lebanese Civil War, the war between the PLO and the Kataib, between the Muslims themselves in Lebanon. You had Muslims killing each other in Lebanon, but also there was a war between the Maronites, who are Lebanese Catholics, and the Palestinians. And in the Lebanese Civil War, the Palestinians were mixed between Muslim and secularist. The PLO consisted of both Muslims and secularists. It wasn't all just Islamists. It was a mixture of mainly, I would say, two different ideologies. I'll just say two different ideologies. You had Muslims, but you also had secularist, atheist, socialists. But the PLO and the Maronites were killing each other. And there were horrendous massacres that happened in Lebanon. For example, in the beginning of the Civil War, somebody found a corpse, I believe, of a Maronite man, I think near some sort of an electrical plant. And so the Maronites blamed it on the Muslims, and so the Maronites would put these checkpoints on the roads, and they would stop cars, and they would ask the man driving in the car, "Are you guys Muslim?" If he said yes, he would take the man out of the car. They would take the man out of the car. They would slit his throat. In front of his family, they would slit his throat. And they did this over and over again. And then the Muslims began to do this to the Maronites. "Are you a Maronite?" "Yes." "Step out of the car." They'd slit the Maronite's throat. And hundreds of people died in this fashion. And this is one of the violent turn of events that acted as a catalyst towards the rest of the Lebanese Civil War. And eventually what happened was that you had a conflict between the PLO and the Maronites. The Maronites were a part of a paramilitary organization known as the Kataib, or the Phalangists. These were Catholics who were fascist, racist. They wanted Lebanon to be purely Phoenician, whatever that means. And the Israelis decided to work with the Phalangists because they knew that they could use the Phalangists as soldiers to kill off the PLO in Lebanon. The Israelis had a big issue with the PLO. People could say that it was because of terrorism, but it was also because the PLO was too moderate. The PLO was moderate in comparison to the more radical Islamists amongst the Palestinians. And the Israelis, they have had a tendency not to like moderates because moderates force the Israelis to be moderate. They force the Israelis to be diplomatic, because if you have Palestinians who are moderate, then that means that the Israelis have to negotiate with them, which would mean the prospect for a Palestinian state. Because if you have moderate Palestinians, you have people who can negotiate for a Palestinian state, and a Palestinian state is something that the Israelis really don't want. And so that's the reason why the Israelis at one point actually backed the hardline Islamists amongst the Palestinians. That's why they backed Hamas, because they preferred to have Islamists. Because with Islamists, then the Israelis could have an excuse to just say, well, this is why we can't really work with the Palestinians. We can't really establish a state for them, or we can't really recognize a Palestinian state because they're violent terrorists. But if Palestinians come along and say, listen, we're educated people, we can negotiate, that's more of a threat. And that's the reason why Israel at one point in time backed Hamas. But eventually what happened in the Lebanese Civil War in the year 1982 was a negotiation between the PLO and the Kataib. Eventually the Kataib and the PLO made an agreement that the PLO would leave Lebanon, and the PLO did leave Lebanon. The problem was that once the PLO had left Lebanon, the camps were wide open for slaughter. And I've talked about this many times. I've written about this numerous times. It's one of the most horrifying stories I've ever read about. People were raped and hacked to death with axes and shot, butchered. It was just a slaughterhouse. And the camps of Sabra and Shatila in 1982 became just that, a slaughterhouse. They became a slaughterhouse. And this slaughter was done with the blessing of Israel. Israel they oversaw the massacre, and they allowed it to happen because they wanted it to happen. And that's why you had Israeli soldiers who were surrounding the camps. And I even heard that the reason why they placed Israeli soldiers around the camps was to make sure that people didn't run away. Well, that was an injustice, and that's an understatement. It's an understatement to say that it was an injustice. It was evil, it was demonic, it was satanic. It was so evil that Israelis, by the droves, took to the streets in Israel to protest against Ariel Sharon. 1 million Israelis were on the streets protesting against Ariel Sharon. It was the biggest demonstration in all of Israel's history. And when I read about those demonstrations, I had hope. I said to myself, look, Israeli people are decent people. And there are still a lot of decent people in Israel. But you see what's happening today. Even before October the 7th, Jewish extremism was rising up. Even before October the 7th, right-wing extremism, racism, anti-Christian sentiment, Jewish supremacy.
הקדוש ברוך הוא ישלח לנו את המשיח בקרוב, ואז כל הערבים יהיו עבדים שלנו.
כן?
על כל יהודי יהיה 10 ערבים, עבדים שלו. חמד תנקה לי את הנעליים, פטמה תגעצי לי את החולצה, ככה זה יהיה.
וואו, אתה מאוד...
מה אני אומר לך?
כן? ואתה חושב שהגיוני ונחמד?
זה יהיה מעולה, פרפקט.
כן? איזה ידעת?
אני מרוקאי.
במרוקו לא היו יחסים טובים עם המוסלמים?
פעם היה, היום לא.
אז למה שינקו לך את הנעליים?
כי פעם הם היו בני אדם, כשיבוא המשיח הם יחזרו להיות בני אדם והעבדים שלנו.
Okay.
All of these ideological characteristics, as toxic as they are, were rising up. They were increasing. And I was writing about this. It's not as if I was oblivious to this reality before October the 7th. No, I was quite aware of it, and I was writing about it, and I was talking about it. And so, looking at all of these dark realities, I told myself yesterday, I said, you know what? Actually, last week, I told myself, I should start reading Norman Finkelstein. I should look at the other side of the story. And I understand that Norman Finkelstein, he may have his biases. But what I like about Finkelstein is his passion. He's very passionate. And he will speak of the injustices that Israel has done. And he'll debate people who are extremely pro-Israel. He'll debate big names, too. He debated Dershowitz. He debated a whole bunch of different people. And I believe he definitely is sincere. Because when I read this book, Gaza, An Inquest into Its Martyrdom, listen, I've been reading for a very long time, and I've been writing for a long time. And I can tell you, I know when someone puts their heart into a book. And I know when a book is ghostwritten. Oh, I know. You can read a book, you know when it's ghostwritten. You can tell everything's on the surface. A lot of statements are vague. Sentences are way too short. But when I read this book, I know that Finkelstein put his heart into it. He put a lot of passion into it. And yes, you could say he's biased. Okay, fine, granted. But people who are pro-Israel are also biased. Yes, they're also biased. Because people who are, oh God, I'll give you guys a story. I remember years ago, there was a church in Israel. It's a church that is dedicated to the miracle in which Christ multiplied the fishes and the loaves. Remember the story in the New Testament. Jesus is giving a sermon. He's speaking to a large crowd of people. And someone approaches Jesus and says, Jesus, the people are hungry. They've been listening to you for hours, and they're hungry. So Jesus said, give them something to eat. And so somebody said, well, all I have is 5 loaves and some fishes. And Jesus said, okay. He multiplied the loaves, he multiplied the fishes, and the people ate, and they were rejuvenized, they were nourished, and so because their bellies were filled, they could continue to listen to what Christ was saying. Well, they built the church in Israel dedicated to this miracle. And that when this story broke out, the story that I'm about to tell you, the Church of the Fishes and the Loaves was a seriously major tourist site. And I read that 5,000 people had been visiting that church every single day. Not every week. Every single day, people were visiting this church. Well, somebody lit the church on fire.
תהיה בריא, תודה לך. שבו, תחכו בחוץ נזהר, בסדר? תודה. מה? זה המחסן כיסאות, נכון?
זה גם מחסן כיסאות וגם מחסן של... הוא רצה אנחנו נביא צוות אחד
Lit the church on fire. Set the whole church on fire. It was a big story in Israel because this place was such a major tourist attraction. It was a source of income for Israel. Tourism was a big source of income for Israel's economy. And I think that is really no longer the case. Correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't think that's any longer the case. And I remember reading years ago that Israel had been anticipating the decline of its tourism industry, and that was why Israel began to invest more on tech and pharmaceuticals, because they were anticipating years ago the decline of Israel's tourism economy. And right now, I mean, how many people are visiting Israel? I know people are still going to Israel, but I don't think it's anywhere near the level as it was 10 years ago. But anyway, this church was set on fire, and it was quite obvious from the beginning that the perpetrators were extremists, were Jewish extremists, rabbinic Jewish extremists. And how did we know this? Because the graffiti on the wall. Somebody had left graffiti on the wall of the church, or one of the walls of the church. And the graffiti said something to the likes of idolaters, blah, 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 blah. All right, you people are idolaters, calling Christians idol worshippers. And why does it say idol worshippers? Because Jews, religious Jews, they consider Christian people to be idol worshippers.
So for me, I look at Christianity as a belief in idolatry. At least they're believing in one idol and not many idols. So it's already better than polytheism.
The world, like Jesus, has brought the recognition of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to the world. And through Abraham, you mentioned Abraham. God told Abraham that he would make him, through his seed, a great nation, and that he would be a blessing to the entire world. Sure, and that's what I believe, that our Jewish people were on this earth to make God known to creation, and that God actually has a plan for the Gentiles as well as the Jewish people.
That I'll agree, but I'll tell you this, right? Someone can say the same thing and trying to bring us to worship Satan, right? Yeah. And say, well, we brought Satan, but also through Satan, we also brought all these other nice things. And so it's legitimate because they brought all those other nice things. So that argument to me doesn't hold water. For me, I believe that God is not one person, it's oneness. The infinite universe, time, space, everything is one Hashem. When we say Shema Yisrael Adonai Lanu Adonai Echad, we say God is one, not there is one God. So I believe in panentheism.
They say Christians worship a man, therefore Christians are idolaters. So I remember writing about it, and there was a woman that I knew. She was a hardcore Zionist. She was Jewish. Hardcore Zionist. I mean the type of Zionist that if you were to say the word Palestinian, she would say, don't say Palestinian. Palestinians don't exist. They're Arabs. That type of person. Well, I wrote about it, and she had written something to us, and she said that I don't believe that this was done by Jewish people. I believe that this was done by Muslims. And I said, well, what's your evidence? And she said, well, and she sent us this article. She sent us this article that was written by some crazy, some Zionist of some sort. And the article basically said something like this. Oh, it had to have been Arabs because the graffiti on the walls, well, it looks like maybe the graffiti was made up of some different materials, maybe like some chalk or something was used. And I remember reading this thinking to myself, how the hell does this even mean that this was done by Arabs? You have zero argument here. Well, the forensic investigation was done. Israeli forensic investigation. And the investigation found a little bit of saliva. Because the people who had burned the church, they brought over a bottle of gasoline. It was gas. I was about to say kerosene, but it was gasoline. And the reason why I say gasoline was because they found this bottle, and they found this bottle at the crime scene, and the bottle had a little bit of saliva. Had a sweat, I think. It was sweat. So they managed to get the DNA from the bottle, which is pretty remarkable. That's pretty impressive. Then they noticed that there was a gas station on the way to the church, not too far away from the church. So they said, well, maybe the criminals got the gasoline that they used to burn the church from the gas station. So they went to the gas station and they said, show us all the security footage. They showed all the security footage. They looked at the security footage, and in the security footage, they found two young men at the gas station filling up a bottle with gasoline. And these two young men looked like fanatic settlers. So I remember doing a follow-up video saying, I told you guys that the perpetrators were Jewish extremists. And I said in this video, why do we automatically assume that some terrorist attack automatically is done by an Arab or a Muslim? And I think this was when, actually it was before I did this video, but this was at a time when the seed that was sowed in my soul was growing. Remember I said earlier that a seed was sowed into my soul, into the soil of my soul, and it was growing. Well, it was growing then. But the people who were telling me, oh, it was Arabs who did it, Muslims who did it, Palestinians who burned the church, those people never came to me and said, you know what, you're right. You know what, Ted? Maybe I should check my bias. Maybe the next time I assume that a terrorist attack is automatically done by an Arab or a Muslim, maybe I should rethink my knee-jerk reaction. And that's the problem. People don't want to jockey against their biases. People don't want to scotch their biases. They just let their biases run through out of their mouths like sewage. And they just don't stop. Their tongue is brittle as an overgrown toenail. And they just don't stop. Now, that's not to say that they aren't people who are pro-Palestine who are biased. Obviously, there are people who are pro-Palestine who are very, very biased. And they're pro-terrorism. And I'm not pro-terrorism. I'm not pro-Hamas. I'm pro-human. And I don't like seeing war crimes. I was going to say war criminals. I don't like seeing war criminals either. I don't want to see war crimes. And I hate how you have Christians who are co-signing to evil. And they are telling people to support fanatics who would not hesitate to kill Christians in the name of Judaism. That's something I will not stand for, and I cannot stand for. That is evil. It is demonic. It's absolutely demonic. But I was reading this book by Norman Finkelstein. And Norman Finkelstein, he gives some interesting observations. And he gives an observation that I have never thought of. So he talks about how there was a war that broke out between Lebanon and Israel back in 2006. Now, I remember this war. I remember looking at the television with my parents in 2006, watching CNN's coverage of the war, watching Anderson Cooper covering the war between Lebanon and Israel, specifically between Israel and Hezbollah. And Norman Finkelstein, and I knew about this years ago. Norman Finkelstein tells us that Israel did not really do that impressively during the war. Israel was not as impressive as it wanted to be in its combat with Hezbollah. Israel's biggest advantage was its air force, which it did use on Lebanon. And civilians were killed in airstrikes. The thing about Lebanon is that Hezbollah is very well trained. And the thing about Lebanon is that Lebanon is not under an embargo. It's not under a blockade. So Hezbollah can import a lot of goodies. Hezbollah can import a lot of serious firepower and weaponry. Hezbollah also is very trained, and they're trained by Iran. So they're very dangerous, and they're a big threat to Israel. Israel's scared of Hezbollah. Israeli soldiers are nervous about fighting Hezbollah. And I know this because when Israel was on the ground in Lebanon, they had difficulty facing Hezbollah. And you're talking about a war in which you had 30,000 IDF soldiers in Lebanon facing several thousand Hezbollah guys, most of whom were not even regulars in the Hezbollah military. They were just citizen militias who had an affinity with Hezbollah, but they were not really officially soldiers of Hezbollah. And even when Israel was facing those guys who were not regulars in Hezbollah's elite army, Israel still had difficulty fighting those guys. So it wasn't impressive for Israel. It was quite ignominious. It was embarrassing for Israel when it was fighting Hezbollah. And even when Israel used its air force, it still had difficulty hitting Hezbollah. And so it wasn't something that Israel took a lot of pride in. This wasn't a proud moment for Israel's modern history. And that was in 2006. So fast forward to 2008, Israel tried to persuade the United States to do a co-strike against Iran. Yeah. Israel tried to persuade the United States to go to war with Iran. And you know what the United States did? The United States told Israel to go jump in a lake. Because at that point, in 2008, people were sick and tired of war. People were exhausted enough by the Iraq and Afghan wars. And the last thing that people were interested in was going to the Zagros Mountains of Iran to go face some crazy Shiites who whipped themselves for some guy named Ali, who's been dead for 1,000 years. So Israel was frustrated by this, and as Finkelstein says, the United States vetoing the proposal to do a co-strike against Iran was to the chagrin of Israel. It was to the ire of Israel. So Israel doesn't really want to face Hezbollah on the ground because those guys are too tough, and you would have not only an embarrassing situation, but you would also have substantial casualties. Israel wants to face Iran, but really can't do so without American help, and America doesn't really want to help Israel by getting into a war with a bunch of chest-beating Ali worshippers. So that leaves Israel with the weakest of Iran's proxies, Hamas. And Israel right now is decimating Gaza. It's been decimating Gaza for months. It's destroyed much of the housing and the infrastructure in Gaza. Tens of thousands of people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes, albeit, and I will acknowledge this, a number of those people were terrorists. Nonetheless, most of the people killed have been civilians. And Israel is going so far as to use AI technology to find targets to destroy. And when they cannot find targets using the criteria that they put into the AI system, which they call Lavender, they simply lessen the criteria to swell the list of targets. And Hamas fighters are in tunnels. Why aren't they attacking the tunnels? Why aren't they going after the tunnels? Why do they do these huge strikes knowing they're going to kill civilians? Because Israel wants to make Gaza unlivable. The goal is not entirely to defeat Hamas. The ultimate goal is to make Gaza unlivable. And they're attacking Rafah. Rafah's on the border with Egypt. Israel right now wants Egypt to open its borders so the Gazans can go into Egypt. Because what the Israelis want is to clear Gaza of Palestinians.
The minimum victory is that Gaza will be smaller at the day after, that at least all the northern area of the Gaza Strip will be at the hands of Israel. This is why the Jewish people has to be the only one to control this area from the river to the sea. Third option, if you want to leave, also, please feel free. We will even pay you whatever you want. Just, find yourself another country. Please feel free to do whatever you want. So
in America or somewhere else?
You want them? You don't want them. Why? They're so nice.
And you probably could get a very large proportion of Israelis, maybe 80, that would support annexing parts of Gaza and chucking as many people as possibly would be willing to leave.
So that they can have room to build settlements. They want to build settlements in Gaza. They want to resettle Gaza.
Arabs will not stay in the Gaza Strip. Who will stay? Jews. Africa is big. Canada is big. The world will absorb the people of Gaza. How we do it? We encourage it.
If they don't want to go.
No, they won't.
If they don't.
The Arabs want to go.
If they don't want to go.
They want to go.
If they don't, what happens?
The normal people don't want to live in hell.
What you're talking about sounds like a plan for ethnic cleansing.
You can call it ethnic cleansing, you call it refugees, whatever you want. If you want to call it cleansing, if you want to call it apartheid, you choose your definition. I choose the way to protect the state of Israel.
And a part of this is ideological. They have an ideology. There is an ideology in Israel that's growing, and that is the ideology of the settler. And so they don't mind killing kids and parents and mothers. They don't mind. They don't care. They don't care. They don't give a damn, these people. Because in their minds, all these Palestinians are just terrorists and they're animals and they're inferior goyim. They see goyim as less than human.
Netanyahu, he is a reflection and a representation of Israeli society. He's an obnoxious, narcissistic Jewish supremacist who thinks that only Jews count in God's grand design. Everybody else, the Goyim, as they're called, they have no place in God's grand design except where Israel decides to situate or place them.
But that leads me to another thought, and that is the shift in society. Remember, I began this video talking about how things are changing dramatically. Israel tried to pull America into a war with Iran back in 2008. And Israel wants America to go into a conflict with Iran because Israel cannot face Iran alone without a ton of people being killed. Now, how can this happen when in the United States, isolationism is becoming the dominating trend? The neocon way of thinking that was very popular back in the early 2000s when George Bush was president and Dick Cheney was walking around and Rumsfeld was walking around, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, that trend of neoconservatism is dead. You do have some people in America who are still neocons, but they're basically dinosaurs. I remember years ago going to Barnes & Noble and I met this guy who was a hardcore neocon. He was an old boomer who loved Dick Cheney, and he was telling me about how Bashar al-Assad needs to be toppled and how the Iraq war was absolutely was wonderful and it was a great success and America absolutely needed to do it. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I thought you people didn't exist anymore, but they still exist. And they're monsters. I don't like them. They're fascist. They're monsters. They're evil. They're destructive people. I don't like them. They're the types of people who don't mind, sending your son out to go die. They'll send your son out to get killed by an IED so they can say, oh, look, this was an amazing policy. These people are monsters. I don't like them. They wouldn't mind doing a massive carpet bombing of a country. And if you told them that, I don't know, 500,000 people were killed because of the war, they would say, well, it was completely worth it, just like Madeleine Albright said. But that breed of American is dying. And what's taking over is the Tucker Carlson American. And these people basically say F Israel. That's their policy. That's their worldview. F Israel. I don't give a damn about Israel. That's their way of thinking. They don't care about Israel. They don't give a shit. So in their minds, Israel is trying to pull America into a war with Iran. And a lot of these people in America are saying, listen, you guys did this before. You guys pushed us into a war with Iraq. Israel was pushing America into a war with Iraq. Yes, this is a fact. Go read Mearsheimer's book on the Israel lobby. He documents this in his book. Go read about it. You can go online and read about this stuff. Israel was pushing America into a war with Iraq, and America went to war in Iraq, and it was disastrous. Now, you could say, well, that wasn't because of Israel. Regardless, when America invaded Iraq, it was doing something that Israel wanted. Whether or not you believe that America went in there because of Israel, it doesn't matter in this particular topic. The fact is that America went into a war against Iraq, and in doing so, it was doing something that Israel wanted. And look at the result. Thousands of American soldiers killed. You had children who lost their fathers, women who lost their husbands, you had parents who lost their sons. And then you had the massive civilian casualties, people being murdered by American soldiers. Oh yeah. There were massacres that were done. Some American soldier went in and killed a whole bunch of civilians, dozens of civilians killed, and he got away with it. Oh, who cares? It's war, There's no rules in war. That's what they always say. All these people who want to make excuses for war crimes, they always say this. Oh, there's no rules in war. War writes its own rules. Don't you know that, you little pansy? And if you're against war crimes, you're a pansy, right? You're a coward, liberal, leftist, whatever. No, I'm a human being, and I don't like seeing other human beings suffer because of some bullshit policy that some fat pigs in suits who are not even near the area of combat pushed for some war to advance some sort of economic interest. But there were massacres of Iraqi civilians. People were murdered. People were raped. Blackwater was over there. They did some evil stuff as well. And then you had all of the ripple effects of the war. The fact that Saddam Hussein was removed, that led to the rise of Iran. Then that led to the rise of Shiite militias in Iraq. And that also led to the rise of ISIS. And that led to the killings of Christians, Assyrian Christians, Roman Catholics in Iraq, Eastern Orthodox Christians in Iraq. And then you look at the fact that so many hundreds of thousands of people were killed as a result of the Iraq war. And people look at all of these facts and they're listening to Alex Jones. Alex Jones, the guy used to be a meme. Now people are listening to him for news coverage. They're listening to Alex Jones as a serious source of news. And they're listening to Alex Jones, and they're hearing about all of these horrific facts, and they're saying, why in the hell would we want to do this bullshit again? Why in the hell would we want to do this bullshit again? And that's why people are listening to Tucker Carlson. And when they hear that Israel wants America to go to war with Iran, they hate Israel. They hate Israel. It's like what Tucker Carlson said. Tucker Carlson said something to the likes of, if you want me to go to war to defend another country, Israel, Montenegro, it doesn't matter, I have every right to despise you. And that's why people are getting into isolationism. People are listening to Tucker Carlson. And, zeitgeists and societal trends and The rise of various worldviews and ideologies, these things don't come about because governments allow them to come about or governments prevent them, stop them. It's not an issue of, what I mean is that it's not an issue of, well, these opinions are flourishing because government allows them to flourish. And if government would just suppress them, then they would go away. Or if the government would just inculcate society with propaganda that's pro-war or pro-neocon, then these isolationist views would sort of dissipate. It's not like that at all. Ideologies and worldviews increase because of various conditions that push people to believe in them. And when people begin to believe in them and they spread and they grow in popularity, you're not going to stop it. And even if you were to try to suppress the rise of this worldview, it would only grow more, because by trying to suppress it, people start thinking, wait a second, why are you persecuting these people for believing this? And then other people begin to sympathize with that group, and the sympathizers begin to believe in what that group is teaching. You cannot stop worldviews from growing when they are a part of the zeitgeist. Once a worldview is a part of a trend, a growing trend, once a worldview is a growing trend unto itself, it's because something has happened in the society that created the conditions in which that trend grows in popularity. In this case, it's the fact that so many Americans were killed in Iraq, the fact that so many civilians were murdered in Iraq as a result of the Iraq War. And so people see the disaster of Iraq and they say, I'm going for isolationism. And isolationism is growing, and it's growing, and it's growing. Now, there's other things that I want to talk about. This is not the end of the video. All right, not yet. So we have isolationism. There's other things that are happening. So Israel is really worried. What's going to happen? Is America always going to be there? Is America always going to be there? And that leads me to another point. One of the things that America loves to say about Israel in order to prop up Israel's image, bolster Israel's image, is to say that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. And I've talked about this before. And it's true. Israel is a democracy. People vote in Israel. They vote for who they want to be in the Knesset, and they vote for the Likud party, and they vote for various religious parties, Orthodox parties, liberal parties. There's democracy in Israel. Good for them. But what's happening demographically in Israel? You have the Arab population, which is the second fastest growing population. Second fastest growing population in Israel. The fastest growing population in Israel is the Orthodox Jews. Now you could say, well, the Orthodox Jews are going to dominate demographically, and you would be right. They're already dominating demographically. But what happens when the Arab population grows to the point where they become a serious voting bloc, a voting bloc substantial enough to impede your agenda, your Orthodox Jewish agenda? Because like I said, the fastest growing population is the Orthodox Jews. Well, the Orthodox Jews, they have their agenda, right? They want to make Israel into a Talmudic state, into a rabbinic Jewish state. And that would mean everyone has to follow the Sabbath. Everyone has to honor the Sabbath. That would also mean everyone has to follow halakhic law. That would mean that liberal Judaism would not be recognized as being a part of Judaism. That would mean you can't walk into a hospital with food that you want to give to a patient that is non-kosher. But there's another population that's growing at a level that's very, very quick, but just one notch below the Orthodox Jews in terms of the speed of its birth rate, in terms of the speed of birth rates, and that is the Arab population. Well, the Arab population has the second fastest growing population. What happens? Right now, they're 21% of the population. That's already substantial. What happens when they are 30%? What happens when they're 40% of the population? So now you have two sides. Orthodox Jews, they got the fastest growing birth rates. They're going to want to establish their halakhic society. Then you have the Arabs, who have the second fastest growing population, second highest birth rates, and they don't want to live under a rabbinic Talmudic society. So what happens when they become a voting bloc that's big enough to impede your agenda of establishing a halakhic society? Halakhic meaning Jewish law. You have the Jews who want to establish Sharia. You have the Arabs, some of whom want to establish Sharia law, or they don't want Sharia law, and they don't want halakhic law. They just want to be left alone. But what happens? There's going to be a clash. And if the Arab population grows to the point, and they're going to grow to the point, when they become a serious voting bloc that could impede the religious aspirations of the Orthodox Jews, is democracy going to be allowed? And I saw a video that really spurred me to do this video. I saw this video. It was a video that was done by Gil Schuster. He's a guy who goes around Israel. He asks random people questions. And you really get a sense of Israeli society when you watch these videos. But he did a video recently and he asked people, should Jews get more rights than non-Jews in Israel? And he was talking about citizens. He wasn't talking about people who were in Israel illegally. He wasn't talking about immigrants. He was talking about Israeli citizens who are not Jewish. Should they get less rights than Jewish citizens of Israel? And some of the answers were quite revealing.
האם יהודים צריכים שיהיו להם יותר זכויות מערבים בישראל?
לא, אבל זה תלוי. ערבי שמכיר במדינת ישראל הוא שווה ליהודי.
אוקיי. אם הוא רוצה להיות, הזכות להיות ראש הממשלה, הוא יכול?
לא.
למה?
זאת מדינת היהודים בכל זאת.
אז הוא יכול להיות מדינת היהודים, אבל הוא לא יכול להיות ראש הממשלה?
לא.
אוקיי, יש תפקיד אחר? טוב, משרד הביטחון נראה לי לא.
משרד הביטחון לא, וראש הממשלה לא, אבל יש מספיק תפקידים, יש מספיק שרים שהיו בעבר, נתפסו על ידי שרים ערבים. ביטחון וראש ממשלה לא.
אוקיי, יש איזושהי עבודה חוץ מממשלה שאסור לערבי? אני מנסה לחשוב.
משהו לא קשור לצבא, לא. עושים הכל.
וערבי שהוא רוצה להתגייס, להיות גנרל.
ממש
לא. אני חושב שיש כבר.
ממש לא, לא, אני לא חושב.
לא?
יש דרוזים? אני לא בטוח.
דרוזים, נכון.
דרוזים זה לא ערבי.
אוקיי. אוקיי, אבל...
מה?
הדרוזים ערבים ועודף.
נדבר על זה גם.
לא נכון.
בסדר, אוקיי, טוב.
אתם לא מכירים, אבל בסדר, רציתי...
אבל זה הגזענות.
טוב, אוקיי.
Should Jews have more rights in Israel than Arabs? Citizens?
Yes.
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 No opinion. I need women.
I'm sorry.
Okay, no opinion.
For sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
Why?
Why? Oh, it's complicated. I don't know if to explain everything, I can do it in English, you know?
אפשר בעברית, אין בעיה.
תראה, אם אתה רוצה בעברית... קודם כל בוא נתחיל מזה. אנחנו נותנים הרבה יותר במדינה ממה שהם נותנים. שירות צבאי, מיסים, כל מה שבעצם אתה אזרח פה צריך לתת, הם לא נותנים.
רגע, ערבי ישראלי משלם מיסים.
ערבי ישראלי משלם מיסים, כן. כמה יש כאלה שלא? כמה יש כאלה שהם מעלימים, שהם עובדים בכל הבנייה, שבאים בשחור, שכל הדברים האלה.
דרך אגב, אני גם מכיר יהודים שבדיוק עושים אותו דבר.
אבל יותר יש, בוא נגיד, יש יותר עובדים זרים מאשר עובדים שהם יהודים, זה בלי ספק.
עובדים זרים?
כן, כל מה שעובד זר בעצם.
לא, אני מדבר על אזרחים ישראלים.
אני מדבר בכללי, אני לא נכנס עכשיו, אתה יודע, אני לא יודע בדיוק מה כל אחד, מאיפה הוא מגיע, תעודת זהות יש לו ומה זה. אני יכול להגיד שמי שחי במקום מסוים, נותן בשביל המדינה, צריך גם לקבל. אם אתה נותן פחות, אתה צריך לקבל פחות.
זה כולל חרדים שלא שולטים?
בוודאי, זה כולל גם חרדים, אין ספק.
שנייה, אני כבר איתך. אני שלי. וואי, הפרנויה. אוקיי, כן.
אני מאמין שפשוט יהודים שנמצאים תחת איום ביטחוני כל הזמן צריכים לקבל יותר זכויות שמגינים עלינו, אבל ערבים שבאמת נותנים מעצמם צריכים להיות בשוויון מלא. זאת אומרת שאלה שכן עובדים וכן תורמים ויש להם תעודת זהות כחולה ואין להם שום איום ביטחוני, אז מגיע להם שוויון זכויות מלא. אבל במידה והם לא מקיימים את כל התנאים שלהם כאזרח, עובדים בשחור, תוקפים בטרור, הם לא אמורים לקבל שום זכות ולא אמורים להגן עליהם.
אז נגיד שיש אזרח ערבי מוסלמי שהוא באמת חושב שחמאס הוא בסדר, מה לעשות איתו?
אם מישהו תומך טרור, הוא לא אמור לקבל...
לא תומך, כאילו הוא פשוט אומר, אין לי בעיה איתם.
אין דבר כזה, מי שאויב של המדינה שלנו לא צריך להיות פה, ואם אתה תומך, הוא אומר שזה בסדר, הוא לא אמור לקבל לא הגנה מהחוק ולא הגנה מהמשטרה.
האם צריך להיות שיש לערבים פחות זכויות בישראל מיהודים?
אתה מארגון שמאל?
אני לא משום ארגון. קיבלתי השאלה ממישהו.
צריכים להיות שווי זכויות לכל דבר, רק זו מדינה יהודית.
מה הפירוש?
זה מדינת הלאום היהודית, בשביל היהודים היא נוצרה. יש בעולם עוד מלא מדינות ערביות שמי שרוצה יכול ללכת. פה מי שרוצה לחיות מדינה יהודית דמוקרטית.
אוקיי. זה אומר
זכויות לכולם, אבל מדינה יהודית.
אותם זכויות?
ודאי.
אוקיי. אז ערבי יכול להיות ראש הממשלה?
ערבי? לא, ערבי לא יכול להיות ראש הממשלה.
למה?
לא.
אותם זכויות.
זה מדינה יהודית.
עדיין, זה אותם זכויות. זכויות זה זכויות.
זה מדינה הלאום היהודי, ערבי לא יכול להיות...
שאתה תהיה ראש ממשלה בסוריה,
כן, אתה... בדיוק. אם אנחנו נהיה באבו דאבי ראשי ממשלה ובמצרים ראש ממשלה יהודי ובירדן...
היה מישהו באומן שהיה יהודי, שהיה חבר כנסת, אבל זה...
לא.
שאתה תהיה שם.
בדיוק.
שאני אהיה ראש הממשלה. אני לא אהיה ראש הממשלה.
מדינה יהודית, רק ראש ממשלה, אך ורק יהודי.
אוקיי, שאר התפקידים מותר?
כל תפקיד שקשור לביטחון, רחוק.
אוקיי.
לא להתעסק.
למה?
למה? כי בוא אני אגיד לך משהו, אם הערבים יורידו את הנשק, יהיה שלום. אם אנחנו נוריד את הנשק, לא תהיה מדינת ישראל. זה למה. הבן של שרון, ככה אנחנו אומרים, אם הערבים יורידו את הנשק, יהיה פה שלום. אבל אם היהודים יורידו את הנשק, לא תהיה מדינת ישראל ולא יהודים.
הם בטוחים שהרגע שהם מורידים את הנשק, הפלסטינים, סליחה, רק הפלסטינים.
אין דבר כזה פלסטינים.
לא חשוב, הערבים שגרים ביהודה ושומרון, נשתמש בזה. הרגע שהם מורידים את הנשקים, אנחנו נחסל אותם.
אין להם נשקים ואנחנו לא מחסלים אותם, אז איפה השקרים, איפה כל הפייק?
אני ראיתי M16 שם.
אין להם נשקים.
אז למה אין לנו שלום איתם?
הם לא רוצים שלום, אנחנו רוצים שלום, אנחנו רוצים לחיות איתם בשלום, אבל הם רוצים להרוג אותנו.
לא, הם רוצים שלום.
אז הקם להורגך, כן, אז הקם להורגך, מי שקם להרוג אותנו, השכם להורגו.
חבל על הדיבורים עליהם. אני גר בלוד.
רגע, אתם לא מכירים אחד את השני.
לא מכירים.
כן, נו, אתה גר בלוד.
דו-קיום.
בכיף.
זה בכיף, אבל תשמע, דו-קיום הזה... אלה שיושבים שם בכיסאות, הם לא יודעים מה זה דו-קיום. לגור עם ערבי בבניין אחד, זה הורס לך את כל הבניין.
למה?
למה? בכוונה הם מדליקים אש בכיפור,
בכוונה רדיו, מוזיקה, בשבת, הכל בכוונה.
אני לוד, אני לשעבר מתנדב בתחנת לוד, ואני יודע מה זה עיר קשה, עיר מעורבת קשה מאוד. ולאחרונה כל האירועים שהיו, ששרפו בתי כנסת וזה, זה ערבים שמקבלים ביטוח לאומי ומקבלים את כל מה שאני מקבל בתור ישראלי, הוא מקבל.
נכון.
והם נוסעים עם הג'יפים הכי יקרים. פעם היו עם חמור ועגלה, היום עם מרצדסים, יונדאי, אאודי, ג'יפים ותראה את האנשים שלהם. זה לא מה שהיה אז. אני גדלתי בעיר העתיקה, ואני יודע מה זה. בלוד. וקשה, מיום ליום הם מתרבים, ושלא נדע, בעוד 5, 10, 20 שנה, ייקחו לנו את העדלות בלי מלחמה.
One guy said that an Arab should never be allowed to become the prime minister. An Arab should never be allowed to become a general in the military. An Arab should never be allowed to be the defense minister. Well, what does this mean? This means no democracy. Because if you have democracy, then an Arab who is a citizen of the country has every right to become the prime minister, or to run to be the prime minister, and to be elected to be prime minister. He has every right to run for office, and if he can get enough support, he become the prime minister or the defense minister. In a democracy, being an Arab shouldn't matter. But what a lot of people in Israel want is for a hindrance on democracy when it comes to Arabs. Well, a hindrance on democracy is not democracy. So like I said, what happens when the Arab population, which is the second fastest growing population in Israel, what happens when they become 40% of the population, 35% of the population? And they become a voting bloc that is serious enough to impede the aspirations of the far right, of the ultra-nationalists, of the ultra-Orthodox. Is Israel going to maintain its democracy? That's the question. And I suspect that in the future, Israel's democracy will dissipate. There's going to be no democracy. Eventually, Israel is going to be an extremist society filled with ethnic violence, filled with religious violence. And it's going to be something akin to what happened when the Romans and the Judeans were fighting each other after the crucifixion of Christ. Not too long after the crucifixion of Christ. They murdered the Messiah, then they started to murder each other. And what did Jesus say? He said, a demon walks into a man's soul, then he leaves the man, and he brings back 7 more demons to possess this man's soul. He says, this is how this generation is. He was speaking of the generation of his time. He says, this is how wicked this generation is. It is like a man who has been possessed by one demon, and the demon leaves and brings back 7 more. So it is with this generation. What was he saying? And what did he say? He said that no generation. That's what he was essentially saying, that this generation is demonic. I said no generation, but I was about to quote Josephus. Jesus was saying that this generation, that generation was demonic. The generation that would go to war with Rome, and the generation that would see the destruction of the temple, the generation that would kill itself in a Jewish civil war, was demonic. And it was demonic. And Josephus said something to the likes of that no generation in the past was as wicked as the generation that fought against the Romans. It was a wicked generation. And I believe that that spirit is going to return. It's going to return. And it's not just Israel. It's a global phenomena. It's a global phenomena of destruction and of chaos that's rising in the world. And I'll talk more about this in a later video. But what we're also seeing is not only the mainstreaming of extremism, because in Israel, you have extremists who burn Palestinian people's homes, they attack Christians, and yet you still have evangelicals who say, oh, they're lovely. So in Israel, they've already mainstreamed extremism. But you're seeing the mainstreaming of extremism throughout the world. For example, a couple of days ago, I went to Twitter. Twitter is very, very weird. It's a very diabolical place. Because I go on Twitter and automatically, it's called X, so I guess you could call it Twix. But I go on to Twitter and automatically I am given posts that are openly pushing racism. And these aren't pages that I'm not subscribed to. These aren't pages that I'm subscribed to. These aren't even pages that I'm subscribed to. I just go onto Twitter, and the first thing is some racist stuff. What's going on here? Oh, black people are this, that, this, and the other. And I'm thinking, did I subscribe to this page? No. Why is this page being pushed on me? Because Twitter is being used as a vehicle for the mainstreaming of fanaticism. That's what's happening. And I see this video on Twitter, and it was a video of a bunch of Germans screaming Ausländer aus. What does Ausländer aus mean? It means foreigners out. The word Ausländer, if you were to translate it directly into English, it would be outsider. Ausländer is basically outsider. Aus, out, Länder. I'm not sure what Lander means. I'm guessing Ausländer. I'm guessing Landa is connected to the word land. So people who are from outside of the land, Ausländer. Well, it's like outsider, right? He's outside. He's coming from outside of the side of the land. I guess you could say it, right? But English language and German language, they have a lot of overlap because, English before the Latinization of the English language and before the Normanization of the English language. English was a very Germanic language. But that's neither here nor there. I see a video of Germans screaming, Ausländer out. I'm thinking, what is going on? What's happening? What's going on? They're screaming foreigners out. And it's a trend that's been going on in Germany of people screaming Ausländer out. And again, when you have this sort of zeitgeist, when you have this sort of trend growing in popularity, you cannot stop it. A reflection of this growing trend is the popularity for the Alternative for Deutschland party in Deutschland, in Germany, which is the most popular far-right party in Germany. They have leaders who have said nice things about the Nazis, and the leader of, or at least one of the leaders of the AfD, his name is Maximilian Krah. Maximilian Krah did an interview in which he said, not all the SS officers were criminals. Not all the SS officers were really that bad. And it's come to the point where the EU's right-wing coalition has kicked out the AfD. Is that really going to harm the AfD? No. It's only going to make the AfD stronger because people in Germany will say, look, the AfD is being persecuted. I'm going to follow the AfD now more. And the AfD is now a mainstream party. One of the most popular, if not the most popular leader of the AfD has been Bjorn Höcke. And Bjorn Höcke said, stop talking about the Holocaust. Forget talking about the Holocaust all the time. I'm tired of this culture of remembering the Holocaust. Enough of it already. And if that guy is the most popular leader of the AfD, that is a reflection of the people who follow the AfD. These people, I'm gonna try to be a little bit charitable here. A lot of the people who follow the AfD are Nazis. So what's happening? The fact that AfD is now in the double digits as far as popularity goes tells us that there is a mainstreaming of extremism. And it's growing even more, and it's going to continue to grow. And no matter what, they can try to suppress it all they want. The government can try to suppress the AfD. The EU can try to suppress the AfD. You're not going to stop it because the AfD is not. The AfD is not the problem. The AfD is simply a reflection. It's a symptom of something deeper in the German society. It is anger against foreigners because of violence being done, or violence that has been done by foreigners. It is the negative outcomes of the migrant crisis. All these things have led to people going back to the ways of their great-grandfathers and their grandfathers. And nationalism is having a comeback in Germany, and it's only growing stronger. And this is a trend that is growing organically. And they can try to suppress it as much as they want. And the more they try to suppress it, the more powerful it's going to grow. Because then what happens when you suppress something, people begin to cultivate a martyrdom complex. Oh, this man is being persecuted. Why is he being persecuted? I'm going to listen to him. I'm going to join his party. Well, why is he being persecuted? He must be saying something that's right. I'm going to join his party. Do you know which group they tried to suppress and it didn't work? And that group ended up taking power and made an event in history that is still remembered today. The National Socialists. They tried to suppress the National Socialists before they took power in the 1920s. The National Socialists had its own paramilitary group. It was called the SA. And the government in Germany tried to ban the Nazi uniform. Yes, before the Nazis even took power, the German government tried to ban the Nazi uniform. They were trying to suppress the Nazi movement. They put Hitler in prison. Did any of these things work? No, it didn't. Why? Because when a trend is growing in popularity and it is a part of the zeitgeist, it cannot be stopped. It is in the collective soul within society. And when something is in the collective soul within society, suppression doesn't work. It does not work. And you see what's happening in Europe in regards to Israel. Let's go back to Israel now. You see, for example, Josep Borrell, who is the, I want to say, foreign minister of the European Union. He said, what did he say recently? He said, I'm not going to call it Israel anymore. I'm going to call it the Netanyahu government. Well, what does that mean? That's like treating Israel as if it's a regime. It's like saying, oh, it's not Iran, it's the Islamic Republic. Oh, it's not Syria, it's the Assad regime. Oh, it's not Russia, it's Putin's regime. And what happened? The ICC said that they want to issue a warrant out for Netanyahu's arrest. And the spokesperson for Olaf Scholz was asked, well, would Germany ever arrest Netanyahu to honor to fulfill the demands of the arrest warrant? And the spokesperson for Olaf Scholz said, well, we abide by the ICC, which means that Germany wouldn't mind arresting Netanyahu. And then you read about Spain recognizing a Palestinian state, Iceland recognizing a Palestinian state, Ireland recognizing a Palestinian state, Norway recognizing a Palestinian state. And what did Israel say as a response to these European countries recognizing a Palestinian state? Well, Mr. What's his name? Bezalel Smotrich, who I believe is the finance minister of Israel, he said, for every European country that recognizes a Palestinian state, we're going to build more settlements in the West Bank. And I read an interview with a Norwegian official, and he was asked about this threat coming from Israel, and the Norwegian official said, that's fine. Israel can say whatever it wants. If Israel wants to continue to build more settlements as a response to European countries recognizing a Palestinian state, Israel can do what it wants, but it's only going to be worse for Israel, and Israel will only be making it worse for itself, which means the Europeans are not exactly getting on their knees because of Israeli pressure. Israel is losing its luster. The pressure that Israel was able to enjoy years ago is deflating, it's weakening, it's declining. The world is turning against Israel. Europa is rising up. And that's something that would be horrifying for Israel. And, you know, there is a German thinker, her name is Muriel Asserberg, and she has stated that Germany should basically go out and arrest Netanyahu. She has stated that the ICC cannot go out of its way to arrest people who break international law, so Germany should go out of its way to arrest political leaders who break international law. And what she's saying is that Germany needs to rise up. Germany needs to rise up again in power. Germany needs to revive its power. And could you imagine Germany arresting the Prime Minister of Israel? Could you imagine Germany punishing Israel? And Israel cannot face Hezbollah. I mean, it can, but not without difficulty. Israel cannot face Iran by itself. And America, I don't think, is going to go boots on the ground to fight Iran to save Israel. And Turkey is rising up, and the Turks hate Israel. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen when Israel's democracy begins to dissipate? Is America going to continue to support Israel? They can't. At that point, they would no longer be able to say that Israel is a democracy. I suspect that one day America is going to wash its hands of Israel. Iran is going to rise up. Turkey is going to rise up. And they're going to say, we're going to punish you for what you have been doing to the Palestinians. And I believe Europe will also rise up against Israel as well. And in such a case, Israel would not be able to really, really defend itself efficiently. You know, Finkelstein, in his book, he makes the argument that Gaza is a giant concentration camp. It's a country that really can't seriously import and export. It's a country, it's not even a country, it's a region that has been entirely dependent on donations. It's a region that has not really been able to be sovereign. It's a region in which you have people who live within a walled up region, blockaded, in which they cannot function as a serious country with a serious economy. And I think about what Finkelstein said about Gaza being a concentration camp. And I think about the future of Israel and how the world will turn against Israel eventually. And I think to myself, Israel will eventually become a giant concentration camp. Anyway, I think I have talked long enough. I've talked for over an hour. Goodness gracious, this is basically a live stream. And I'm happy that I've talked for over an hour because it's like a live stream, guys. Yeah. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.